there was this anger that came out, and it was palpable. I mean, it really was palpable.
Mm.
And frankly, it was very scary being in that room at that time as a man.
Hello and welcome to Shared.Care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.Care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.Care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.Care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
Hi, Damien. I'm well, thanks. Here, it's the morning here, and it's the evening for you. So I should be a bit more sprightly, perhaps, than how you're feeling. I don't know.
You need to be caffeinated, I think. I've had some coffees throughout the day, which I think are just kicking in for me. But but it is wonderful, I think, in today's world. COVID, as much as it was detrimental, also had some wonderful things in the sense of you and I can connect around the world, which we probably wouldn't have if it wasn't for that.
Very true. It's very true.
For the audience, who I have here, I have Thom Dennis. Thom Dennis. Now, he's well known for his expertise in creating transformational change and is a sought-after advisor on the spectrum of leadership, diversity, inclusion, and justice issues. Now, Thom is the CEO of Serenity and Leadership Limited, the premier culture remodeling, change and leadership specialists. He is an international speaker, voiceover actor, and Amazon #1 author. He also holds an MSc in Change Agent Skills and Strategies, is a certified facilitator and accredited by the CQ Center, and he's a certified NLP Master Practitioner. Now, I'm feeling very intimidated here now that I'm talking with you, so it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And we're talking about... Sorry, go ahead.
I just said... intimidation is not something I aim for.
Yeah, but sometimes it just naturally happens. We have that just by our natural presence. I have a negotiation program I talk about, and one of the sources of power is actually your personal, your positional power, where just by your natural skills and things that you have in your position, that you have a lot of power. But here, in what we're talking about, which relates to power in a way, is what is manly. And in society, there's a lot out there at the moment about men being lost, lonely, and not feeling useful in society. And from that perspective, what have you seen where you are? Let's start more broadly, in some broad brushstrokes, and narrow it down to some key issues. But what have you seen?
I think that there are many ways to look at this, but yes, I think men, a lot of men are a little confused. It's about, if you go back a while, it was pretty clear. The woman stayed at home. She looked after the children. She made the home.
Yeah.
Or the nest, if you like.
Yeah.
And the man flew off. He did his work, and he came home with, in sort of crude terms, the food. And So it was a simple equation. And now, for lots of reasons, this has changed. One, I think, is because a lot of men took advantage of that system, and women were the ones who lost out.
Yeah.
And so there was a sort of a reaction, and for a lot of women, they feel that in order to experience equity, they've got to be able to do everything that a man has traditionally done. And in many cases, they've done better.
Definitely.
Which means that men look on at this, and I think that because this isn't just a woman's experience now. I think it's archetypal. It's been going on for such a long time that when and I've experienced this, where women have been in a safe space where they felt that they could express themselves. One of the primary emotions that come out is anger. And I remember being in a room. It was about 150 women and about 4 men, and it was a senior, well, a CEO of a multinational who was a woman, who was talking about being a woman in a man's world. And she talked about abuse. And it created a permission in the room for women to feel what, for a great deal, I think they had suppressed. And so there was this anger that came out, and it was palpable. I mean, it really was palpable. And frankly, it was very scary being in that room at that time as a man.
Yeah.
And so there has been this backlash. I've only talked about a couple of dimensions of it. There's many dimensions of it. But because women have succeeded in doing things at least as well, and in many instances better than men, men have stood back and said, well, what's my role? I don't understand anymore. It used to be simple. Now it's not.
Yeah.
And women take that 2 ways, I think. Some just say, well, look, man up.
Yes.
Stop whining, just get on with it. And there's other women saying, well, actually, I want you to be yourself and feel confident in yourself, and we can walk together alongside each other. There doesn't have to be a hierarchy. Now, classically, I think that actually there wasn't a hierarchy. There was just a celebration of difference. But we have inserted a lot of hierarchy. There was just this case that, I mean, I wrote an article in a magazine that came out today about, I think it's Goldman Sachs, have been forced to pay, I think it's £1.7 million. And it's been a 10-year case of women trying to sort of say, look, we're doing the same job if we're doing the same job as a man, we want to be paid the same. And the system has really resisted that. And so absolutely justifiably, women have said, that's not okay, it's not fair. And so we're in this sort of situation now where there's this push-pull. Men are very confused, a lot of them. Men are actually, a lot of them are quite frightened of, there's all these stories of men refusing to get into an elevator, or I don't know, in Australia, do you call it an elevator or a lift?
Both, it's fine. We've got
Whichever.
multiple languages here. We're a big melting pot of cultures.
If there's a woman by herself in the lift, then the man won't get in.
Really?
Because he's
wow.
I mean, there's been a lot of instances of this because he's terrified of being accused of something, being inappropriate in some way, and that part of that is apocryphal. But there are lots of instances now going on where women have said, "You were inappropriate. You touched me in a particular way," and the man is saying, "Well, I've always done that. I'm sorry if that's offensive now, but it never was. I don't understand the rules are anymore." Anyway, look, I banged on for a long time.
No, there's a lot there. I mean, there's a couple of things there that I'd like to unpack. I mean, firstly, the part about getting into elevators, because I've wondered about, and I've talked about this a lot on that about that on this show. This I've heard, and it's been said that a woman somewhere got upset at a man for holding the door open, and I'm yet to find where that happened. And I'm wondering if it's an urban myth.
It's happened to me.
Has it? Okay.
Yeah. She was very aggressive. So, why are you holding the door open? Do you think I'm incapable of doing it myself? It's like, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. No, because I said I mean, from my perspective, I do that all the time, but it's not gender biased. I do that for men and women. I let other people go first, and sometimes other people, mostly, well, I can't think of a woman that's done it, but maybe that has, and I just don't remember. But mostly it's a man will go, no, you go first, and we're not going to sit there debating who's going to go first. It's like, well, I offered, you said go, I'm going. But it's interesting you mentioned that, and that fear, I think, is, I mean, I've talked to some of the officers of the court here in Australia that work in the family violence area, and the court very much has the attitude that if a woman makes a complaint, there's possibly, because the man is stronger and more intimidating, there's a risk here, and it's a resource thing. They don't have the resource to go into every little nitty-gritty detail and work it out. So they just take a blanket view. There's a risk here. Let's deal with that. But the guy ultimately gets labelled with that, even though the approach is they have what's called consent without omission. So you can say, okay, she's made the complaint. I'm going to agree to the order. So you're consenting without admission. So legally, you haven't admitted to anything, and there's no admission there. And you deal with justice. I'm sure you understand where we're talking about. But the thing is, they still have to go through that process. And even here now, it's mandated that the male attends a behaviour change program. They just can't implement. It's only new. They just don't have the resource to implement it. So a lot of the men actually don't go because they don't have that. So I can understand that fear that, because all it takes is someone to say something and craft it the right way. But how does a man deal with that? From that perspective, how do we go, okay, there is that risk there. What do I need to do now? How do I, coming back to that and being lost and scared, what do they need to do?
That's a $60,000 question, that
one. Well, that's what we're here for.
Well, I think they have to understand that this is we are now in a place where the earth is not solid.
Mm-hmm.
It's movable.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to be sensitive. I think that if you choose to open a door for someone, and the woman, it's a woman, and they take offense, then I think you've got to accept that that's her problem. there is nothing wrong with holding a door open.
Yeah.
I think we as men have to carry a much greater sensitivity to how women are now thinking.
Mm.
What was okay, there are many things which are now not okay.
Mm.
And therefore, just assuming that you've always done something in a particular way, you've related to people, I mean, I was on the Underground in London, and I'd been with a couple of people all evening, talking about this kind of thing, actually.
Mm.
And we were on the Underground, and the people were peeling off, and I was left with just one person.
Yeah.
And I got up and I touched on the arm and said, "It's been great to meet you. See you again."
Mm-hmm.
And the next day, I had an email from this woman with the subject was "Incident on the Underground," and it was her accusing me of I don't know the exact word. It wasn't molesting, but it was more than touching inappropriately.
Mm.
And she also wrote to my friend who had introduced us and said, "This happened, and you may decide that you don't want to associate with him anymore." It was very aggressive.
Mm.
And so what do I take away from that? I'm very tactile. I do, I shake hands, or I touch somebody on the shoulder, or whatever in relating. I do, but and I'm a creature of some habit. But what I have taken away from that is a kind of sensitivity that just doing as I've always done is going to get me in trouble sometimes.
Yes.
And that's without any sort of negative intent. It's just how I am and how that is interpreted by someone else. And I think that one of the lessons is that we really have got to get beyond thinking that if it's okay for me, it's okay for everybody else.
Is that part of
people?
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that people talk about the golden rule. Treat everybody as you would wish to be treated, and it is just not right. It's completely wrong. You have to get into a mindset where you treat other people how they would wish to be treated.
Yes.
And it's a completely different mindset.
And how do you know that? How do you know how they wish to?
You can't make assumptions is the first thing, and you're going to make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, I think you've just got to apologize and say, I'm awfully sorry. That was done with no ill intent. And I understand that is a boundary for you, and I will undertake not to cross that boundary again.
Is there a case where, in you talking about being more sensitive and being aware of things, is being aware that there is a risk there, and stepping away when you identify that risk? And I'm probably more relating that to a dating sense where, because certainly in that, and I'm probably coloured a little bit by working with a lot of people in the family violence space, both men and women, and when you look at I've looked at some of the statements made to police, and even I've talked to a lot of police in that space, and they're going, there's just a lot of stuff there that's not true, basically. And I know from talking with lawyers as well, a lot of things are now crafted. The police are trained to look for certain words, certain things, and I've got friends in the police force, and they know that a lot of these statements are now crafted by lawyers to include those key statements. And when you get into the detail, you go, well, this that logically doesn't make sense, but because it's got those statements. So, and I'm highlighting that's a pretty big risk. So is it something we need to be teaching men to be going, okay, you need to be sensitive to that if you identify that there's a potential risk there, it's probably better just to, it's like if you're walking past a crocodile pit, you try and keep your distance, otherwise you're going to get snapped. Is that something we need to be teaching men as well?
Well, I tell you what, I think one thing, and I have to acknowledge it, I think it's interesting that a lot of these conversations are much more advanced in Australia than most other countries. It's I don't know why, but you guys are more advanced in the conversation, which is great.
I think, I've heard a couple of comedians talk about Australians, and they say it's just because we don't give a shit and we just have the conversation anyway.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's that. It's like the work that's been done on bringing up boys, and that you've got Steve Biddulph and other authors who've written some excellent work. Actually, I've got one of the books on my desk now. I don't remember. Yeah. Making of Men.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. Anyway, it's just an aside. Australia seems to be. If you want the experts on bullying, go to Canada. If you want the experts on bringing up men, go to Australia. It's what it is.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah.
Yes, boundaries. Boundaries. I think that something that we need to teach in school is boundaries. What is a boundary? How do you set a boundary? And how do you honor a boundary? And when you talk about the dating piece and men, women from an intimacy point of view, people talk about the hell yes. If you're getting a hell yes, then you go for it. And if there's anything else, you don't.
Okay, I haven't heard that before. So, like you're saying, if they're dating and meeting, and then she's like, go, then that's a hell yes. Is that what you mean?
Well, I think again, this is sort of complex, but I think that when you're in the heat of a moment, it's very easy to make assumptions.
Yes.
And actually, an awful lot of men particularly will say, well, I don't ask permission to kiss or something, because it's like it just takes us completely out of the moment. And yet, what I've heard from an awful lot of women, they would say, I really appreciate that.
Asking, can you kiss?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. And, in the more intimate moments, asking for permission to go to the next stage, if you like, is also by many women certainly really appreciated. And what you're doing is at each stage of development of a moment, you are checking that it's still okay.
Okay. Yep.
And it gives the normally the woman, but it might be the other way around, the opportunity to just reflect and say, actually, I've gone as far as I'm comfortable going right now. So that we don't have these assumptions. Assumptions are so dangerous.
Yeah. That's interesting you mention that. Yeah.
There's an American woman, I think she's American, might be Canadian, I think she's American. Betty Miller, I think, is her name. She's done a huge amount of work on boundary setting, and has come up with this what she calls the wheel of consent, and the different aspects of consent. Are you giving? Are you receiving? are you taking? All of these are different, if you like, paradigms of a relationship dynamic. Came out of body work, when someone's sort of doing body work with someone else. It's very interesting. If you're massaging someone, are you giving to them? Or is it actually kind of a turn on, and are you taking?
That's interesting, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we don't have to sort of go into in depth, but there are dynamics of consent and giving and receiving and so on, which it's really helpful to understand. And at any moment, a receiving could be shifted round so that you're being taken from. See what I mean? So it's complex.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that sounds extremely. I mean, how's certainly a young guy to know, because when I'm thinking back to, as you're talking, thinking back to my dating, which was, that was a long time ago when I was that age, more than 30 years ago, and it's like, wow, there's so much stuff to think about. How could you? Any wonder that men don't want to go out there and have sex?
And a lot don't.
Yeah, well, that's
because
one of the things
they don't understand. And yes, you'll get some women. I hope I'm not mansplaining here, but from what I'm understanding is that
I'm a man and I don't understand, so feel free to tell me.
Well, it's like, give me my man back. There's also that message where we become so proper and so regulated that a lot of the rawness out of relating has gone out of it.
Because you're talking, I mean, I'm trying to think of. I can't remember a time where I remember one time where no, that wasn't kiss. That was something else. I'm trying to think of a time where I've actually asked a girl, could I kiss her? And I can't think of a time in my life where I've actually asked that question.
Yeah, it feels, well, depends on who you are, but for a lot of men, it feels very odd.
The same token too, I've been kissed by some. I mean, it was at a nightclub with a bunch of work colleagues and the office next door as well, and talking, with this girl, and who was from the office across the road, and she just reached across and smacked me one on the lips. And I was like, oh, okay. She didn't ask me, and I didn't mind.
And what exactly, you didn't mind. And then for an awful lot of men, they say, God, I wish that happened to me. But in this whole conversation about what's equal, there are some men now who would say, well, I was violated. My boundaries were broken there. So we're in a mess.
But isn't that case? I mean, I was going to say, because when I'm thinking about those moments, I mean, and maybe I was just lucky, but it was kind of like, well, there's a certain thing, and it sort of naturally was progressing, and there was kind of a feedback, even though it wasn't spoken, there was a feedback in it, and it kind of just evolved together. I mean, is that part of that sensitivity, being aware of, okay, that are you giving or receiving, or is this a mutual thing?
Well, I think that there's so much lovemaking, I think, that takes place, and it has a beautiful natural progression, and that there isn't any checking out. so on, and it all ends up beautifully.
Mm.
And the next night, one of the pair might actually feel slightly differently. And because it went beautifully one night, is not necessarily guarantee that it will the next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the difficulties in all this is that I think an awful lot of women accept the advances of a man, where actually, if they really felt free and able, would say, "This is not working for me. I'm now giving to you without actually my full consent." And
it's kind of like buyer's remorse.
Well, no, but I mean, I don't know what the percentages are in your country, but in many countries, the percentages of rapes that take place in the home is very high.
Yeah, I don't know. I would imagine the data on that would be very. I know the research that I've read in this space. I mean, the data is actually very limited that they're relying on. So it's hard,
and it's very difficult, of course, because if there is a natural sort of assumption in many societies that if you're married, the man has conjugal rights.
Well,
so there is no
there was
such
some laws around that, but years ago that don't exist anymore. Same. I mean, I think Australia had laws. Well, you had to consummate the marriage, but that's not there anymore. I don't know if it was, but it's certainly not there now.
Yeah, but in certain countries, it still is.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting where this conversation's gone. I think when you one of the things that's very good, I think, is the advances in the study of trauma and the understandings of the effects of trauma and what actually is traumatizing. And I've heard conversations over the years, and you see it in lots of films as well, which is awfully damaging, I think, where the man turns around to the woman and says, "Look, say you were raped. It get over it." And
really, wow.
Oh yes, and it's like I don't think many men, unless they have been violated sexually, I think there's an awful lot of men do not understand what the effect of having your boundaries broken in such a way that you feel that you have been violated. That's not just about rape, but whatever that is, and the effect of that often lasts a lifetime.
Yeah,
trauma like that lasts and lasts and lasts and lasts, and that's there's so much education that's needed around that, which is why there's been this big push to get into sort of understanding what consent is and what if you're not in a hell yes, then you're in a no.
Yeah, well, this is I'm because it's so this is I mean and so the data, I mean, I've read the data, it's not my experience because from sex should be a consensual joining of two people in my mind anyway. And I've been in relationships and you're with a partner and she said no, and it's like, okay, that's it. It's not happening. And that's where it stops. And same token, I've been in that situation where I haven't been in the mood, and it's like, sorry, I'm just not in the mood. And that's just the way it works. How I think it should work, and this is what I'm trying to understand for young boys as well. Well, hopefully not too young. Do you think part of that is driven by the porn culture as well, where there is if you look at how sex is portrayed in porn, it's not it's really not about two people making love is really how it should be.
Depends on the porn, but and depends on the definition of porn as well, of course.
Yes.
But where there is porn with violence, this may be an odd parallel, but I think of Donald Trump and one of the great dangers of having someone like that is that they speak what many people in their deepest, darkest places inside themselves wish that they could say, that they've been brought up in an environment where they're not allowed to say it. And Donald Trump said all sorts of things, still does, that gives people permission to think terrible things. And so with the violence that you see in some porn, in some people that will excite something in them to say, I want that. And without having seen it, without having had that sort of level of permission created in them, they would not have gone there. So I think that porn is, well, it's addictive, which is not good, but it's also, it can be helpful for some people, who just want to explore something consensually, great. If both people want to do whatever it is, then fine. You talked right at the beginning about power. This is one of the difficulties of it's not a difficulty, but it's a situation where most men are more powerful physically than most women. Not always, obviously, but and in the moment, it's easy to abuse that.
Well, that's what they were talking about in the court.
So having an awareness of you.
I was saying, that's what they were talking about in the court, in the sense of most men are more powerful, they're stronger and more intimidating, and therefore they just blanketly put that as a risk and deal with it that way, because, again, limited resources, while it may not be fair, it's just, that's life. Life is, not always fair, but we need to deal with things in an economical way that work.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that.
It'd be ideal if we had the resources to do it. I completely agree. Yeah. Too many friends are in the lawyer space who say it's law is about winning, and it's the winning of the lawyers. They make arguments work, and I've seen that too often to result in huge legal fees, both in personal and commercial spaces. Unfortunately.
Yes, and I in one of my early podcasts I talk about bullying and my own experiences around bullying, and this differential between what is justice and what is right. And justice is created by the state, and very often does not produce an outcome which is right. And that's what you're describing as well.
Oh, very much so. It happens all the time, where you look at it and go, well, actually, logically, this doesn't make sense from a common sense perspective, but the outcome, if you look at it from a legal perspective, is it in line with the law? Well, yes, it is. And they're two very different things.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
the people who are making the law. I can't answer for Australian government, and the British one is doing terrible, terrible things right now.
Okay. Yeah. And this is where, and from that perspective, I mean, how do we? I mean, and I remember, as a kid when I was playing football, our football, not your football, we call that soccer, but when I was playing Aussie rules, I'll call it Aussie rules. How's that? And the coach, I remember very distinctly, said, whether you agree or not, play by the umpire. Because if you try and argue against the umpire, it's just going to frustrate you and it's not going to work very well. Is that a case where we're at now as well, whether, we can debate whether the law is right or wrong, and I'm sure, I think I'm a big, facetiously but partly truly, I think, the quote about 99% of all lawyers make the rest look bad is about true. But from that side of things, is it a case of making men more aware, going, hey, this is the situation you're in, maybe it's not fair, and we can debate that forever, and it could take forever to change, but right now you need to be aware of the system and play by that rule?
Yeah, it depends what you mean by the system, but I think that in terms of just relating with someone, let's say of the opposite sex, I just think the assumptions that one might bring to that, particularly if you've been around for a little while, in terms of age, the assumptions that you bring are likely wrong, and that you need to develop a level of sensitivity and to be able to, but to give yourself the permission to make mistakes. But that's why this whole thing about asking permission, asking if it's okay to go to the next step, is, you could just see that as a level of respect. That's all. I respect you. I would like to do something. Are you with me?
Yeah.
I don't know what people, when they hear this, will be thinking, because I think that there's a society. My experience of Australian society is quite different to that in the US and the UK, and so I don't know how people receive that over over here, over there, where you are.
Yeah, unfortunately, maybe our audience is global, so.
Well, fair enough, and therefore there will be people. I remember dealing with an organization in the States, actually down in Texas, and they had a colleague that was based, I think, in Buenos Aires, or something like that. And he had a reputation down there of going around and pinching young girls' bottoms, and everybody giggled about it. It was just him being flirty and frivolous and so on, but there was never any negative reaction. And honestly, I don't know how all the women thought about that. But I think there was a level of acceptance and brushing it off with a sense of humor. Whereas we said to that guy when he arrived up in Texas, you try that once and you're going to find yourself in prison. Yes. So, different societies have different attitudes for this. And at the same time, whose attitudes are we talking about? Because it may well have been down in South America where he came from, that actually a lot of the women actually didn't like that, but there was no recourse because it was just accepted. And, I think of some barristers, lawyers that I've spoken to in the UK, where there was a lot of misogyny in the legal world, and you talk to some of the senior women in that environment, and they say, "Oh, look, for God's sake, that guy, he behaves like a little boy. Just ignore him." Whereas a younger woman is going to say, "I don't accept that." So you have a generational attitude difference as well, but on both sides, on the receivers and
just
on
makes it even more complicated, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We live in a very complex soup, and I mean, there's a professor of law who gave an extraordinary talk that I went to in London a couple of years ago, which you can find it on the internet. And she talks about sexual abuse and misogyny at the bar, in the legal bar. I'm talking about. And someone said to her, but surely I can say to a woman, "Oh, I think you look really attractive today," or I love the smell of your perfume, or something. And she said, "No, you can't. You can't say that anymore. And
you're not allowed to give compliments anymore."
Well, not allowed. It's quite likely to get you into hot water, depending on where you are. And yes, we started this conversation with you said, a lot of women are saying, I want my man back. And I want to be able to wear Coco Chanel and for a man to notice that.
Well, she has her hair done, and he notices and goes, I like your hair. But it's different when if you're talking about your partner, giving you lots of the compliments. It depends on the person or how you do it. I mean, I'm thinking the 3 Men and a Babies movie here, where they're talking. He's reading this ridiculous book to the baby, and says it's not about what you're reading; it's how you deliver it. Is that more the case?
I think. Well, I just think that if you're going to do these things right now, I mean, because we're in, I think, in a kind of transitionary phase. There's a lot of pushback amongst a lot of men who just hate this whole situation. They hate the confusion. They hate the fact that they're expected to not say things or to ask permission. There's plenty of men who hate that, and there's probably quite a few women. I don't know. But we are in a place where the whole melting pot's been really stirred up, and racism is in that pot as well. What can you say to somebody? What is construed as racism and what isn't? These are movable things, and what is a rule or a law in one place is not in another. So I just think you have to be much more conscious. If you stop someone in the street, say, "Excuse me, I think you look amazing, and I love the coat you've got on," or something, you may get a slap round the face, and you may get a delighted smile saying, "Thank you." That's really nice feedback. And if you're going to do it, then you've got to accept that sometimes it's going to land wrong.
Mm.
I mean, you could stop and say, "Excuse me, I'm really struck by you in some way. Do you mind if I tell you about it?"
Mm.
So the woman can say, "Well, actually, I'm not interested. Thanks very much," and walk off. Or the woman might say, "If it's nice, yeah, tell me."
Yeah. It's often, and I raise that point about how the delivery goes, because often comedy can be a place where taboo items are raised, and because they can do it in that space. And in on Saturday Night Live, and this is an old skit, they did a skit called "Sexual Harassment and You," and it was a sexual harassment work video. And they were going about, the workplace has changed, there's women in there, and the ultimate, and then they had these scenarios where a guy went and asked a girl out, and she called HR, and then another guy come in, and it was all, and he grabbed her on the breast, and she gave him his number, sort of thing, and so they really hammed it up, and the guy that was was not an attractive guy, the other one was really attractive, and the three rules they got at the end was be handsome, be attractive, and don't be unattractive. And I just wonder how, and that's, obviously, and I was just wondering how much of that does come into play, where it's, it is how you approach it.
But and dare I say, it is how you look to a degree. Again, I can't answer for women on this, but I think there's some pretty scary statistics about dating apps like Tinder and like Tinder, where a very attractive woman will have a huge amount of attention, and a woman who isn't particularly attractive, classically, gets far less attention, and vice versa. It works on the men's side as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on that. Yeah,
right. So, which means that if you are an attractive whichever, you have choice and you have power. And if you're not attractive, then one can see a kind of frustration, particularly, I don't know, amongst men. Maybe it's the same.
There's a lot about that amongst, certainly on the Tinder app, where men are, and when you go there too, there are different motivations, but certainly, a man who's not got a great job, good looking, all that kind of thing, will often get swiped. I don't know which way. I don't use Tinder, but which way you swipe, and we'll struggle and get that frustration. Swipe right, yeah. So I've never used it. My dad has used Tinder, but I haven't used Tinder.
Yeah. But again, it leads to this sort of frustration amongst a lot of men, certainly. And that it sort of relates into the whole incel world, involuntary celibate, and the frustration and the anger and the despair that is experienced by these people.
Is it a case where we've become too reliant on that technology? I remember, and it probably couldn't exist now given what you've talked about, but when I think I was 20-ish, I was in the army, so it was somewhere between 18 and 22. I can't remember what it was. But in Perth, they had a nightclub, but it was a ballroom dance nightclub, and it was massively popular. And you'd have these rings of people doing progressive dances. So you do a little routine, then move to the next person. Do a little. It was like speed dating, but doing exercise while speed dating. And then the music would finish, and you try and look where that person is that you're really connected with, and try and find them. And I'm just wondering, have we lost a bit of that, where we're too reliant on this one-dimensional? I wouldn't even say it's one-dimensional. If you're going to a photo and you're swiping left or right, whichever way it is, I mean, that hardly gives you any indication about that person. Have we lost that ability to just get out and connect with people and actually get an understanding of what they're like?
And the pandemic made that a lot worse.
Yeah, true.
Because people weren't out, they weren't meeting, they weren't sensing the energy of the person. So yes, I think we are in a world where, for all its advantages, the internet is killing various parts of us. You know, it's fascinating when you start talking to the senior people in these organizations, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and all that. And if they're honest, they all say, my children, they're not on it. They're not allowed to be. Because they know the damaging effect that these things are having. So yeah, we're losing a lot of our humanity. It's extraordinary how Facebook talks about connecting the world, but they actually disconnect the world more than they connect.
Because I was wondering from that, because yeah, as you mentioned, you know, there's so much research showing now that people feel, even though we're more connected, technologically speaking, we feel more lost and lonely. But I wondered about that from the perspective, if you look at a lot of the things that are on the internet, it's a lot of people just putting their opinion out there, or putting their whatever thought they've got out there. But there's not a lot of listening happening. There's not a lot of, you know, okay, let's have a discussion. And is it a case where we've lost that ability to listen? Because a lot of times you just have to look at the polarization. I mean, you mentioned, you know, Donald Trump. You look at the last presidential debate in America. That was just to me, a debate is two narcissists beating each other over the head with their opinion, and that was the epitome of what a debate is. But there seems to be less real conversation happening where someone's actually listening.
Yes, that's right.
Do we need to be taking that?
You know, when you say what's a man to do, and I said be sensitive. Another way to look at that is to listen.
Yeah,
it's not about making assumptions. It's about truly listening to the other person. And actually, I think a lot of people would say that it's kind of an ache inside them is to be heard. And so that's a gift that we can all give to someone else, is to truly listen to them, and without actually trying to put anything right, because actually just listening is often all that is needed, and any more than that, it's too much.
Well, it's something I learned way too late in life, but I'm glad I learned it anyway. Was someone said to me once, and they said, people don't so much remember what you say; they remember how you made them feel.
It's Maya Angelou, I think, who said that first.
Was it? Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Yeah, and for me, that was very profound and really changed the way I interact, because I was normally about giving people facts and figures and trying to convince them that way. But when I understood that, it became so much easier to get people onto your side by just helping them feel good. And all of a sudden, they would start listening to you as well.
Yeah.
Is that the education we need for young boys?
Well, yeah, you know, how to relate. How to relate, how to it's when you start listening that you begin to perceive the person at a different level. So then it's not just about what you see through your eyes. Objectification is the word I was looking for. Instead of objectifying, then you actually go deeper and you begin to relate, dare I say it, with the person's soul.
Yeah. Because when you have that connection, whether you believe in that or not, but when you have that deeper spiritual connection, put it in that terms, there's much more there, which then relates to everything else that you do together, from kissing to making love, all that kind of stuff. Walking on the beach, if you've got that connection at the soul or spiritual, whichever way you're leaning, there's so much more intensity there.
Intensity and realness.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it a case too for talking with men, is that sensitivity thing? Because I was just thinking through this as you were talking about it, and this hell yes, which I haven't really got into that much, but I'm glad that you shared that, because I'm kind of exploring that, and I was relaying that to that experience I told you about at the nightclub and putting those pieces together. And I was just wondering from that sensitivity perspective, because I remember being a young guy, and it was always like, oh, you're so excited and you're not really thinking about it, and you're trying to, because you're so excited. Is it a case of where putting some, because I sent my son to do martial arts very early, mainly for stillness, but he's learnt a self-control, and he's 14 now, and he's had parent-teacher interview today, and they talked about how much self-control and in his own space and being aware of what's going on is, and I attribute a large part of that to his martial arts training, because that sensei was very much about those lines being, you're in control of yourself, and you should be. But I was thinking it from that perspective as well. Would it be helpful for guys in this space, given where we are now, is teaching that self-control, but also too, because I was looking at that experience I had in that nightclub where that girl kissed me. And we knew each other. We'd seen each other all the time, because they were in the law firm. I was in an accounting firm on the same floor. So, and this is linking back to purpose. I was always very busy going about my job, doing what I was doing. I wasn't really, and it was, they said to me, because we went out that night as two firms, which we'd never done before. And so when we were out, I wasn't in the workspace anymore. So I, let my hair down a bit, and I'm having a bit of fun. I'm out on the dance floor, mucking around, and they're looking at, and there was actually two girls. One of them got upset because she didn't kiss me first, as it turned out on that night. But they were like, said, we thought you were such, I can't remember what the word was, but you were so serious. It was along those lines. We thought you were so serious, and now here you are, this fun guy. And I'm just relaying that from the perspective we teaching guys to have that self-control and have that sensitivity, put it out there, but step back a little bit and allow them to chase you a little bit. If we're in equality, why can't women chase the guys?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And depending on which society you are, and I think a lot of women feel pretty free to do that, and others they don't at all.
The mysterious silent type's always attractive, from what we understand.
Yeah. Yes. So, I think one of the things that a lot of men have to deal with, and is so hard, is rejection. All the time that it's the man's job to make the first advances in that. One of the things that will hold them back more than anything else is that fear of rejection.
Yeah. How do we overcome that?
You smile and move on.
And for the listeners that they're tired of this story, but when I was in the army, there was a guy, and he was good looking, but he wasn't very bright, but he was always dating these really amazing women. They were gorgeous. They were doctors and lawyers. They were part of charities. They were just this whole package. And me and my friends are looking at him going, how's he doing this? And we obviously went to, he's well hung. That was our response. But one day I asked him, I literally went up to him and said, Shane, you're not very bright. How are you dating all these amazing women? I literally said that to him, but he wasn't fussed by that. He put his arm around my shoulder And he said, and he turned into like an Obi-Wan, and he said to me, Damien, what you don't see is I ask a lot. Most say no, you just see the ones that say yes. And that was a life lesson for me back in the day, going, it doesn't matter what it is, you just keep asking if you get a no. But how does someone who's not in that position, who is affected by rejection, learn to have that self-esteem to say it doesn't bother me that someone said no? It's not a reflection of who I am.
What he also left out in his story is that confidence, that self-confidence in him, was also extremely attractive.
Sorry, say that again.
So, his self-confidence, confidence in a man is attractive to a lot of women, I think.
Oh, yes, yeah, I get what you're saying. Yes, yeah. Sorry, cut out for a second.
For the person who has a lot of trouble with rejection, what that's doing is chipping away at their self-confidence. And that's not good.
No.
Because they've got to work at their self-confidence, and maybe they go off and do what your son's doing, do some martial arts training, or they find something that they're good at.
Yeah, well, that's what's coming back to it, is that purpose. They need to find that whatever it is, but they're confident at it and go about it that way. And if they're confident about it, the right person will be attracted to them.
I don't know if that's a rule, but it sounds good.
Well, that comes down to that confidence, isn't it? I mean, because when I was coming back to that nightclub experience, I mean, I was busy going about my day in the office, just doing my work, not really thinking about it, and interacting with these people, from a work perspective, because we used that law firm all the time. So I knew these people, but I was always interacting from a work perspective. I wasn't thinking beyond that. I probably thought they were nice people, but I didn't. I was focused on my work. And I'm just wondering, from that perspective, is it a case where, as you say, that confidence side of things for people that are worried about it, just find something that you like doing and be good at that. That will give you confidence, and then from there, you're more likely to find that right person. As I said, maybe it's not a rule, but 3.97 billion women on the planet, I'm sure if you're going in a direction, there's someone who likes what you're doing. There's women that likes comic books, so there's got to be. No?
Yeah. Yes, I think that. Yeah, I mentioned incels, and that is the difficulty with them, is that they're coming from a victim place. For me.
Yeah.
And
that's not confident.
And no, there isn't any confidence in there. So be confident in yourself, and I mean, it's like selling in a way, isn't it? If a woman turns you down, you say, "Great."
One step closer.
Yeah, I'm now one step closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I deal with that a lot in business. I mean, I talk with the companies that I work with are wanting to increase sales. It's like, it's a numbers game. You've got to get out there and ask people, obviously refine your process, and the better you get the process, the more, you're going to get hit rate. But also too, if what you've got is not of value to the person, then to try and push a sale on them is not, the right thing to do. And it's the same token. Is that a part of what guys need to do, is actually work out who they are and who they connect with? I noticed when I went out, after my first marriage ended and I was out dating again, I became very aware quickly of people that just I didn't connect with, or they didn't connect with me. And it was like, well, there's no point trying to push this to see if something happens, because when you first meet people, that's the best you're going to get, right? After that, they start farting in front of you and doing all these kind of things that you didn't expect, So it's like, if you're not connecting in the very first few dates, then it's probably better to move on to someone that you might connect with.
Yeah, it's that recognizing that this is not your fantasy, but this is a real person. And getting over all the projections, all the things that we put out onto people, which is about self-awareness and understanding what makes us tick. So much better if you got a sense of how you think, how I think I tick.
Yeah.
Then it's much easier then to sort of relate and sort of I lost my train now, but it's relating. It's all part of this difficult situation.
I mean, coming back to what you were talking about before, when we were talking about boundaries, I mean, how can you set boundaries if you don't know who you are?
Yes.
So do we...
I think you've got to start with understanding yourself. I talk about it a lot in leadership.
Yeah.
We've got a retreat coming up in September, and I'm really talking to leaders about how what really drives them, and an awful lot of people don't have that depth of self awareness to understand what drives them. And if you become what people would regard as successful, and yet you don't have a sense of what really is driving you, then you're never going to be satisfied. So however much money you've got, however many women you've got, or if it's a woman, however many men they've got, you'll still be left with that sense of emptiness, and that's the void. That's why we call it leading through the void. And so, it's that. And for leaders of the future, they need to be self-aware. It's a fundamental.
Because I love that you've gone there from that leadership perspective and talking about this fulfillment. Because I've done all that. I flew to Nice, private helicopter, chauffeured me to Monaco. It's fun, but to say that was fulfilling, no, it never. It was fun, and highly recommend doing it. And a lot of things that I've done, it's like it's fun to be able to do it. But if I was doing it just for that, I probably wouldn't have been in. I wouldn't be in a very good shape. It's not what that purpose is. And is that, I mean, from that perspective, again, coming back to men, certainly young boys, do we need to be spending more time helping them find out what is right for them, not what is some sort of, especially if you're looking at TV. I mean, I love making fun of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Stallone and that. And as much as I love those movies as a kid, I mean, I make the joke about condom full of walnuts, muscle bound, thing. It's very one dimensional. Do we need to have, and that's why I kind of like the transition that came, and probably why it was so popular with the Die Hard movie with Bruce Willis, because that script was rejected by many of the actors because they're going, this character's a wimp. But he was he had more dimensions to him than characters beforehand, and obviously it was extremely well received because he showed vulnerability. He showed, oh, holy crap, I've got to work this out. Not I'm just going to work in there guns blazing. It was like, oh my God, throw this thing down and it blows up, and holy crap, it's coming back at me. Is that part of what we need to be teaching young men and maybe older men, that there's much more depth to who you are, and find what that is?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
How do you
we are complex beings, and as you say, there's so much on the cinema. I notice it a lot. I mean, sometimes when I'm cooking, I put the TV on, and all the films. There's a number of channels in this country where they have the old cowboy and Indian films.
Yes.
They are so awful. I mean, dreadful, ego-driven, white is good, colored is bad. Um, everything that actually we've now realized stinks, and yet they keep putting these films on, and people, I guess, keep watching them. I just think that's just sad that we need to grow up, actually, and that for an awful lot of people is uncomfortable. Having to really accept responsibility for ourselves and our situation and the choices that we've made. So much easier to climb on a spaceship and go up to some far galaxy and shoot up aliens than actually look in the mirror and say, you are the source of all that happens, good and bad.
Well, I love that you've gone there, because I have that from share.care's perspective, we have 10 principles, and the first one, not that they're really in any order, but there is one at the top, that's personal responsibility. And from Sophocles, he quoted, "It's a painful thing to look at your own trouble and know that you yourself and no one else has made it." That personal responsibility, accepting, and we talk about this a lot. I've talked about it a lot, where as simple as if you're walking down the street and trip over, and get embarrassed by that, which I've done as a young kid and done as a young adult, and then for some reason, I'm not sure why, but I switched. And so whenever something like that happened, I just owned it. And I remember the first time I did that, I tripped over and I was in the crowd, and I just went, "Yeah!" And everyone started clapping and it completely changed that dynamic, where I don't have to be embarrassed about messing up now. And is it something we need to be, again, teaching young boys and men that messing it up, failing is okay. That's part of life. You did that. I don't know who does this research, but somebody researched how many times a baby fell over while it was learning to walk, and it's something like 8,000 times. And so we've failed many times before we succeeded, and that's okay. Do we need to be teaching young boys that? And if so, how do we do that?
Well, yeah, that's difficult. You're talking about the forming ego, which has a positive function as well as a negative function. The negative comes on, I think, more as you get older. But part of this is educating the educators, is teaching teachers, and also parents.
Yeah,
this is not just, this is not a one-dimensional thing, because when a boy does something and they show vulnerability, and maybe the teacher says, "Well done," he goes home, tells his father, who says, "You're a wimp," and all that good stuff, poof, goes up in smoke. And so yes, we do need to teach them, but you can't just flick your fingers and just start inserting that into the curriculum.
No.
You look what's happening in America today. There's all sorts of parents groups that are insisting that books are taken off the shelf. They are burning books in America.
Yeah.
And that's religion gone crazy. And so it's part of the pushback that I mentioned earlier. It's happening in all sorts of dimensions. So we're in for some many struggles. But if you can have a community which is supportive, and the parents can see are shown the good that comes out of this, then fantastic. Yeah. Well, who was it? Yes, it's Marianne Williamson. Who's running for president in the States, was being interviewed, and they said, I can't remember the question. Actually, I don't think I heard the question, but essentially it was, but aren't you sort of really weird? you don't fit in. And she said, well, actually, if you look at it, it's the Democratic and the Republican parties that don't fit in. They are both completely out of touch with the human beings that they are claiming to have the responsibility to regulate. She's spot on.
Yeah.
She's spot on.
Yeah,
Williamson for president, that's what I say.
But I think, I mean, because that's come, I've heard that from a number of commentators talking about how the world has gone a bit nuts, and there seems to be some common sense coming back now, where there is a bit of pushback against this, extremism. Anyway, we've talked for a while now, and I know you've got to get ready because you're going to travel to America and deal with that, so you can go and vote. but
sadly, I can't vote in the States, but
but from that perspective, if you were to sum it up, for people out there, if we put a framework around, what is manly, how to be a man, how would you sum that up?
I would sum that up by saying respect people. Don't assume that what you think is okay for the other person. Listen. And be willing to be vulnerable.
I love that.
Which means manage your ego.
Yeah,
but that's respect, listen, be sensitive, be vulnerable.
Love that.
Then I think actually you are becoming a real man.
Wow.
Because then your strength comes from a good place, and it's directed in a good way.
Yeah. Or to quote Spider-Man, with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
That's why everyone likes Australians. We can make a joke out of everything. Thom, it has been such a pleasure. There's been so much wisdom. I could chat to you forever. I'd love to have another chat again in the future. It's been so wonderful having you on the show, but I've taken so much from this, and you shared so much in-depth knowledge and gone to places where people don't really want to talk about, and we've gone there. So I really appreciate that you did, because it's really helpful to people to have these conversations. So thank you for making the time. I really appreciate it, Thom, and hopefully we can catch up again in the future.
Thank you, Damien. Thank you. Well, if anyone wants to carry on the conversation, I'm always happy to do that, and I make no claim to knowing all the answers, that's for sure.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.